Welcome, everybody, to our special rewatch of 100 Perceptions Raw Materials. This is a little documentary that we made almost exactly a year ago. And what we've done, which is truly delightful, it's making my heart fill with joy, is we have brought the band back together. So on the screen in front of you that you will be able to see right now, this includes the likes of Barney, who's our producer, Darren, who actually got the whole thing off the ground in the first place, Helen, who had the idea for how we were actually going to do this documentary, and then a whole variety of the scientists, the researchers, etc., who poured in their hearts and souls into what was going on behind the scenes. And we also have Richard Harrington, Gertje Schetemer, and myself. So we were the ones in front of the camera. That was a delightful experience, wasn't it, Gertje and Richard? So
Wonderful, wonderful.
it was a wonderful experience. It was great.
Good
So it
fun.
was it was a lot of fun. So what we're going to do over the next 90 minutes is we're going to spend the first half an hour having a discussion with Darren, Barney, Helen, and myself, talking about how the documentary was actually made. So from that filmmaker's perspective, which whilst for Helen, Barney, and Darren, this is their world, these are their lives. For the rest of us, it's a bit like magic. It's all very exciting. So actually hearing how did we actually put the whole thing together? We're then going to watch the documentary, which could be a really painful experience for some of us. And we're going to do that by pasting the link to the YouTube channel into the chat. Everyone will hit play more or less together. But then we can show support for one another by writing appropriate comments in the chat as we watch that. And of course, that's about half an hour long. And then we're going to finish off by having a second panel session with all of the researchers. So with the likes of Sarah Gleason, Rashad, Gertje, Richard, and Christoki as well. So coming together to say, right, well, what was the research that either went into it, but also some of the impact that perhaps we monitored coming out of the documentary as well. Does that sound okay for everybody? Everyone's nodding along, which is great. By the way, this is the first time that we've actually all been in the same virtual room, I think about a year. So it's all feeling quite nice, isn't it?
A bit
Because
unscripted, yeah.
unscripted. What, you're saying that we're winging it, Richard?
Not at all.
That's unusual. So on the note of winging it, so maybe Aileen, if we can spotlight Darren, Barney, Helen, and myself, and to our lovely attendees. And anybody who's watching along on the recording after this, we've had lots of people watching the recordings from Responsible Raw Materials immediately after we've finished doing the sessions. For the attendees, feel free to write comments into the chat, etc., questions for our panelists. And for everybody else who is a formal panelist but not spotlit, also feel free to either write comments into the chat or just wave your hand at me and I'll bring you into the conversation. So firstly, some introductions. Shall we go around the room? Darren, who are you? And why are you here? And then perhaps we'll go to Barney.
Okay, I'm Darren Lamb. I was executive producer and sustainability lead on the project. I come from a TV and content production background, and now basically I focus on helping teams create content and film stuff, but at much lower emissions.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Darren. And we'll dive into the sustainability credentials and the thinking that went into the film in a little bit as well, because it was awesome what we managed to do there, I think, in terms of savings and stuff and optimization. Barney, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Helen.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I was exec producer on this project too, and my background is TV as well as branded entertainment and a lot of YouTube content and a bit of socials these days. So I'm a sort of jobbing freelance producer of sorts, and this was a great project to be part of.
Amazing. Thanks, Barney. And Helen.
Hello, everyone. So I was the producer on the documentary. My background is I work at Critical Productions. So I'm very much involved in creating this initial idea. But then before Critical Productions, I did a bit of work in the film industry. So I worked on some big Marvel films and Disney films and things like that. And a bit of ADing, a bit of running, a bit of health and safety work in the background as well. I've done all sorts. So now I'm here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen. And I think everybody knows who I am. I'm Sarah. So I was not only on the research side of the documentary for various reasons, yeah, stood on those steps in the Natural History Museum and waved my arms around. So the purpose of the documentary, it came from the Horizon Europe Project Vector, which we're going to hear lots more about shortly. And we basically, I think the deliverable, and Richard's will be able to remind us here, the deliverable was basically make a documentary. Great. And actually, we did try to make one, and what was put together, we decided wasn't good enough for Vector. So the 100 Perceptions documentary was our second attempt, at least our second attempt, at making this documentary. And the background to it was Vector as a research project was due to come to an end in May 2025. And we made the decision to basically start from scratch again in approximately November 2024. Now, the problem when you're making a documentary about raw materials is the kind of initial defaults, and maybe Darren and Helen, if you want to come in on this, the default is to think, right, we'll get some beautiful drone shots over different landscapes across Europe, and we'll go and we'll speak to people and see what they're thinking, what they're feeling across Europe. But last time I checked, actually getting those beautiful shots, you don't tend to go and do that in the winter time. So that meant that we had to have a rethink. And this was when we got together in a little group and we said, right, what could we do? And maybe Helen, do you want to talk us through what those discussions included? Because it was a lot of whiteboarding and a lot of us thinking, okay, what on earth do we do? We've only got a few months to film this. We need to get it done. How do we go about telling a story that really leans into the fact that it's okay for people to have different perceptions with regards to raw materials? We want to hear them and then just try and understand where they're coming from. But Helen, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I remember those conversations, the early days. It was kind of, what are we going to do within a few months? And can we put something together that is interesting, that is going to stimulate some kind of critical thinking and isn't just kind of the standard documentary that you mentioned? So I think even the original idea I was thinking of was let's go out and let's go and find those people because that's kind of a natural jump that you would make. Let's go and speak to the people that have all these different opinions. But traveling across Europe or wherever it was going to be would prove to be not only tricky in wintertime, but also more expensive than it has to be as well. You know, getting flights to go to different places and finding and sourcing the right people to speak to as well would be quite difficult. So there was a few different ideas I think that we were running with at that point. But it was actually, I'd been watching a lot of YouTube at that time, and there was a channel called Jubilee, which is a little bit of a controversial channel, I believe. But they get together a bunch of people who have different viewpoints. And the world at the moment is very, polarized. And so I was thinking, well, this is kind of something that works at the moment. Getting people into a room together to discuss different opinions. And so that's kind of like the initial idea. This started with let's get two people in a room and just have them have a conversation. And then that was what developed into 100 people. I can't remember how we got to 100 people in the end, but the initial
I actually
idea
wanted it to be 300 at one point because then it would be beginning to be statistically relevant. So, yeah.
I don't think me and Barney wanted it to be 300.
Yeah, this is when development
Yeah.
and production don't go hand in hand
Yeah,
sometimes.
that's a lot of people to organise. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a case, wasn't it, Helen, where this idea it kind of evolved, and I think it was a case where we went, right, let's imagine what if we get a number of people into a room, and somebody did say Squid Games at one point in time. We thought we're not going to kill them, or at least we're going to try not to kill them, but we're going to basically play some games, or we're going to go through things where people will discover, learn, and really challenge themselves in terms of some of their preconceptions with regards to certain questions. Now, Darren, it was around about this time that you got involved. We said, right, Darren, you're doing a basically a placement with us at that
Yeah.
point in time, and you'd said, I don't want to do anything to do with production. I came to
That was
you.
the one thing I said. I do remember it was the one thing. Please, nothing to do with production.
Yeah.
So yeah, fine, absolutely.
And I said, please, can you help us? Because of course you've been a BBC producer, etc. I was like, right, we need help. And how do we get something like this off the ground? So that's when we came to you and you said, Sarah, it's all fine. We'll do a beauty parade and we'll find the people who can help us actually make this film. Do you want to talk us through that process?
So yeah, I think it's very important to have the best partners and experts that you can rely on in a very short space of time, which is what we had. I knew a variety of different production partners from my career as a producer. So we ran a very fast tender process, partly on creative approach, partly on operations approach, and also on the sustainability approach to the project, which was important to me as I've sort of been transferring my skills and experience into purpose-driven organizations and projects, really. So I was lucky enough to know Big Circus production company and the people that run that. We had a long conversation. I think we all felt some excellent chemistry when we met everyone, and then we developed it very quickly into a pre-production plan, really, which I sort of sat as a bit of an orchestra conductor, I think, between everyone might be the best way to point it, just to pull everyone together and get the different sections of the orchestra lined up and ready to play.
Yeah, because it happened really, really fast. And I think in the other people that we looked at, we interviewed an organization. They make very high-end car adverts.
Yeah.
So there was one idea we could do something like that. And then, but it was a case of no, Big Circus in terms of really specializing in live TV and being able to turn things around really quickly. That was one of the reasons why we went in that direction. And it was at that point in time that we met the lovely Barney. Now, Barney, did you have an inkling as to what it was you were letting yourself in for, or is this just normal in your world?
I'd say it's normal, which is the good news. Everyone who did the background deck, the creative deck that went into, getting everyone's appetite whetted as to what this production could be. Knowing Big Circus too, I sort of signed up before seeing the treatment. I think I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it. This is like, I love science communication. I love this stuff. This is great. And then I saw there was 100 people being cast, and I was like, because that is obviously budget permitting. That is a big ask, and to get 100 people to a place, and but these things happen. You say yes, and you make it happen. So it was a very good. There's a lot of background. There's a really good foundations to work from. I suppose my job was to come on board, as I've done with these projects, and you just have to make them a reality. Take it from paper and get all the cast was pretty much set, but the crew and the background of 100 people, and make it universally interesting, create intrigue, appeal to Joe blogs, to the experts in the field, and don't feel like anyone's being alienated. And then there was the long process of, I suppose, creating this schedule, or this sort of running order, which dropped breadcrumbs along the way. So we had that lovely pre-titles that you did in all the different places around the world, which gave us a really nice. I won't do too many spoilers, but created that real nice scale that we were going to be really going into something quite mega here. It's a global thing. And then do a lot of explaining up front, which I think we did pretty well with the introduction and telling this is why people need to know this information. So a lot of explaining up front, and then had to make it very visual and very entertaining at the same time. So I did do a couple of stints on Big Brother about 15 years ago. So the tasks and how to make things visual, and as people will see in the documentary, it's not just hands up and talk. There's like a lot of movement and interaction going on, and people are having to be culpable and make decisions, and be part of that experiment process. So, and also, one thing that we did a lot, Sarah, wasn't it, is remain impartial, which was, again, as Darren will know, that BBC training that we've both had both had over the years. So it's a real, yeah, it's a real mix of super, super, you know, specialist factual content, but with a nice, engaging, entertaining layer, which gave it an entry point for people who didn't know much about it, and we wanted them to know more and get involved. So it was an exciting process.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, that was the case there. The call to action was, okay, so you find this a little bit interesting, go find out more or come find out more. Now, Barney, you used a few terms there. So bearing in mind, there are lots of people on the call who don't know anything about how a film, for example, or a TV program or something is made. I wonder, Helen, can you just very quickly talk us through, so what is pre-production, production, post-production, and what does that process usually look like?
Yeah, so pre-production is kind of the planning process. So that was kind of coming up with the idea and all the talks that we had, trying to work out how this was actually going to work. And then once we decided all of those things, it's into production, which is actually, casting, scripting, doing all of the majority of the work to make the thing happen. Also includes making the documentary as well. So, I mean, going to the Natural History Museum, how do you get into the Natural History Museum? Do we have contacts where we can kind of make that happen? So someone's involved in like the locations, for example. Where do we keep 100 people until we need them? Is there a space that we can keep them? There's all sorts of like logistical things that happen among this whole process. So there's a production side and there's editorial side. The production side are much more logistical and doing all of those things. Also, how do you feed 100 people? What are we going to dress them in? Hair and makeup? Is that going to happen? So all of that happens on that side. And then editorial is much more
Mm.
Barney's world, which was scripting it and how do we make this the most um, accessible thing for people to understand. And then post-production is basically everything afterwards. So that heavily involves the edit, which both you and I, Sarah, know very well, that was our world for a long time. And then it's also involving like marketing and getting it out there, um, which can carry on for like a good couple of months after the production has happened. Um, yeah, I think, yeah, unless there's anything else I've missed.
No, I think if we bring in Barney now as well. Now you say we were involved in things for a long time. I mean, this all happened really, really
Mm.
quickly.
Mm.
So I mean, I think we officially started that pre-production, so all the planning and everything. I mean, it was January, wasn't it, Barney?
January. It's January, yeah.
Yeah. So it was in January last year, and then we filmed, what was it? Was it the 26th of February or something?
Yeah, it was about six. It was no longer than 8 weeks in total.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think I'm more edging towards 6 weeks
Yeah.
to
So
get
so
ready.
it was a case where, so and then obviously we released it on the 1st of May. So it was actually a really fast process in terms of
Mm.
getting everything done. And Barney, you were mentioning some of the key aspects. So obviously part one of the kind of the key component parts of the film was having 100 volunteers who were
Yeah.
drawn from very diverse backgrounds who also didn't really know why they'd been invited to the Natural History Museum in the middle of the night. And I
Yeah.
remember we gave you guys the most horrific briefing, which was we want 100 people who are as diverse as possible.
Yeah.
But you did it. So how did you
Yeah.
find 100? Because we didn't pay them or anything. I mean, we fed them pizza, but how
Yeah.
how did you find 100 people to come to the museum and play with us?
Well, there's an incredible associate producer on the production who was Holly, who was tasked along with me for casting those 100 people. So well done to her, outstanding work. It's not like a film where you just phone up an extras company and say we need like 100 people. You can't do that because it costs a lot of money. So it was very old-fashioned casting, also street casting. We went out to the streets of South Kent to go and speak to people nearby and see if they wanted to pop along for an evening's entertainment, and learn something. Tapping into lots of different clubs, and people around London. We also looked on the tube lines that link to South Kent to make sure so there's an easy way in and out, and little strategic things like that. And it was just people are interested about these things. So we didn't give the game away by any means, but we said there is a big decision to be made here. Do you want to be part of it? And do you care about the world you live in? Not to sort of give a guilt trip or anything like that, but just press the buttons that people will sort of react, like respond to, I suppose. And it was really hard work, but it was actually good fun. You
Yeah.
know, was
Well,
it always?
and you did the most amazing job. I mean, we had
Mm,
people, I think, we had what, two people who were like 7 foot tall, each of different ethnicities. We had
yeah.
people who had come from, so whilst they lived in and around the London area, and we'll explore why we constrained ourselves with that scope in a second, Darren. But it was a case people did have backgrounds from around the world. And so
Mm,
that was great. And I can see Hershey nodding away because from the social science perspective, having that diversity of backgrounds and perceptions, and what do people do in their normal lives, what do they work as, we had students, and professors through to people who work in IT. We had quite a few people from the film industry. I wonder why.
mm.
I,
Yeah.
I think we had quite a few of your mother's friends, Barney.
Two. Yeah. Lindsay was who you'll meet in the episode. Was lovely. Yeah, no, she was great, and a cousin or two as well.
Yeah. Which is brilliant.
But the main thing was the shuffling of people around like Simon Cowell X Factor style, going who's going to work, who's not going to work, and actually being very interrogating it and being very ruthless, really, in terms of there's 11 of those people, let's not have another one, let's add someone else into the mix. So it was a lot of communicating and a lot of moving people around. I think actually we had about 105 there on the
Yeah.
nights.
So if you count
Um,
them, you'll see
yeah,
we've
and
actually
then
got more than 100.
well, and then as Helen was saying, it was the logistics of getting them into the building, fed out, and then we had about a 5 hour window
Yeah.
to get the lot and get them out and get them home before midnight. So otherwise, they would turn to a pumpkin.
Yeah, so with that, so obviously there was the pumpkin factor that we had to be aware of, but we'd promised them all that we would be finished by 11 o'clock at night, and the reason for that was, of course, they needed to be able to catch the last tubes home. And Darren, why was it that we felt so strongly about public transport?
Um, the reason really comes down to if you watch any kind of TV, video, film, whatever it is, every one of those projects has a huge amount of emissions associated with it. If you watch a Star Wars film or something, obviously, which is much larger scale, that's about 2,500 tons of emissions for one film. So the approach for this project, due to the subject matter as well, I think it was really important to try and create and film it as sustainably as possible. It's not just what you make, it's how you make it, in my view. So yeah, there were some big decisions to be taken. I think it was early on we were looking at big sort of studios outside of London where we could fit the people in, and then sort of doing a bit of a scope on the kind of emissions that that might create with, I think the cast and crew was 160 people all in,
Mm,
all those people traveling by a car, it would have just gone through the roof. So with these type of projects, there's sort of two benchmarks really. There's an organization called Ad Green, which looks after branded entertainment content and adverts really, and the emissions associated with those. And there's also probably a name that people are a bit more aware of called BAFTA. So BAFTA measure emissions for programs as well. So, as an example for the kind of project that this is, a half an hour educational documentary, I think Ad Green say about 6.5 tons of emissions, BAFTA say 12.5 tons of emissions. But what we did was put a whole range of policies, and working very closely with Barney and the team at Big Circus, in place, and we brought it in. I think it was about 2.3 tons of emissions, which I think, as an overall headline, I think is a really interesting way to approach these types of projects. And as you say, so one of the biggest issues with production filming is the travel. It's always the travel sits at number one. So to settle not only on the incredible space that the museum offered us as our location, but to have that in the hub of lots of public transport links, easy for catering, for loading in. That was all fantastic to be able to plug into their power supply rather than bringing diesel generators in, which cause emissions, bringing our own vegan catering in, which we did, rather than having a red meat diet for the catering. All these little incremental things overall can bring your emissions down, which is what we did. And so I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, no, and I think that was one of the key things we were able to bring through in the report, was to say, because we actually focused on it and we did almost design a lot of the planning around how
Yeah,
can people, how do we make sure that people use public transport, etc. It was interesting because it did constrain things in some
yeah,
aspects, but
yeah,
actually made sure we had a better outcome at the far end of it. So we've got
yeah.
about 4 minutes before we actually hit play on the film. And I want to skip over the actual filming because everyone will see what went on there. And it was, yeah, it was such a fabulous space to be able to film in. And just to quickly touch on the edit. So this is where, so Barney, obviously, this is where you well and truly held the pen on this. And together with the most amazing guy called Kofi, who was our editor, you guys put together the first cut. You then let us take a look at it. There was lots of conversation. We then did a second edit, more conversation. And then I think when we went into that third edit phase, you were lucky enough to have both Helen and myself sitting there in this little edit suite with you. But I don't know, Barney, if you want to talk through that edit process.
Yeah, well, the edit really starts in pre-production. You've got to be thinking about how you're doing, how the edit's going to pan out there, really, and filming it out of sequence and making sure that not everything, you don't film exactly how it comes across in the program. We had to merge things together, we had to move things around for the for the shooting schedule. But essentially, it's everything is a paper edit anyway, so the script turns into the well, in my way of working, will turn into that paper edit, and then you piece it together with the editor to unpack the episode with the additional bits and the voiceovers that we got. So the pre-title does, you've got that explainer that gives you enough to grab hold of and go, I want to stay till the end and watch this. And then it's very much a suck it and see process. You're going through all the footage and all the hours. Although we had like 5 hours, 5 hour shoot window was probably equated to about an hour and a half maybe of footage to then stitch together and make into 30 minutes. I think our first cut was probably about an hour and a half. Yeah. And then we're sifting it down, sifting it down, sifting it down, moving it around, merging it together. And Kofi's documentary brain was incredible. It's like, I don't understand that. What is it? We need more information. Or we're too far ahead of ourselves to be able to be telling people this. Let's move this forward. And there was lots of jiggery pokery, and as you know, Sarah, as well, there was a huge sort of um, uh, eye on how are we coming across here? What message are we sending? What should we say? What shouldn't we say? And I was listening to it yesterday in the car as a podcast on the way back from a recce, and I was like, the collaboration on this was huge. All the visuals had to go into it. Helen, we did a huge B-roll search to make sure everything felt visual and stimulating and explained as as well as it was engaging and entertaining and full of information that you didn't know before you started watching it. So it was a real collaboration across the versions. Version one, this is it is at its largest. Version two, shrunk down a bit, more messaging. Version three, it's a bit tighter. Version four, get Sarah and Helen in the edit to come and really shape this into the tightest sort of half an hour it can be. It's the wackaday approach. There's no pauses, there's no there's no R's, there's no hesitations. You just rock, right, YouTube audience just want to be taken through the whole thing at a pace to really sort of increase engagement. I realise the time might be up, so I'll be quiet.
It's all good. It's all good. So I think the really interesting thing for me during all of this is I'm so used to usually being kind of in that research world where you think the important stuff is actually the research. And we'll hear more from Hershey later on when we talked about actually how did we design actually the study that we did during the documentary. And so the emphasis was on how do we do this in a way that is appropriate and makes sense from a science perspective, but then turning that into something that is visually appealing and is actually interesting to an audience was a very different mindset. I'm not saying, Hershey, that social science is boring, just to put that out there, but it was really interesting. And Barney, we had a lot of conversations about you saying, well, with your TV brain on, well, Sarah, you might find that really interesting and it's factually important. Nobody cares. And I
Mm.
think that was a really, really interesting view that we needed to keep very much at the forefront of our minds.
Yeah. Yeah, if it alienates someone or someone doesn't get it, they're gone. So everything so you have to reverse engineer things really. And if there's something you don't know 23 minutes into the episode, that has to be explained early on. And what is brilliant about working with scientists and professors is, and what us producers know is that we are the audience because we don't know things. So we're our own litmus test, or we're our own sort of um, punch bag to be like to say, did you know this? And is this common knowledge? And am I stupid? Like, why don't I know this? But the point is that it's taking people on a journey who have zero knowledge on something, and then sort of giving them the tools to sort of get interested and get engaged and become a fan, in a way. And I, for one, through this process, and my two young children now, it's like, we've got an interest in rocks, we've got an interest in earth raw materials. We know what earth raw materials are. We know the difference between a critical earth element and a rare earth element. All those little differences that we found out is that we found out along the journey too. I've also got my rock to prove it, Sarah. So I thought I'd bring along.
Brilliant. Amazing. Amazing. I think just final words, if we go to Helen and say, so Helen, you've been obviously working in this world for a little while now in terms of working with people who find raw materials absolutely fascinating. Have you got anything to just build on what Barney was saying in terms of almost that curiosity and that delight and going, huh, I didn't know that, or can you tell me more about this? Or, or what could scientists do to make your job easier?
Oh boy. I mean, I've been at Critical Productions for like what 2.5 years now, and I still have to check all sorts of things because the thing is
Mm,
the world's ever changing and there's so much that I still have to learn, but I feel so much more um like educated about the whole topic. The problem is that it's so complicated. It is, I mean, there's no right answer as well. Everyone is kind of discussing things all the time. And so it's the whole getting people from different worlds to come together to make stuff, to maybe find out what the solution to this whole dilemma is. And that's kind of what I find the most interesting part of this, my job, is actually sitting there and listening to some of the smartest people I've ever met.
mm,
Not to be,
Yeah, keep going, Helen. Keep going.
Um, but also I get to kind of sit as an observer and see how this whole
mm,
world's changing. Working with Darren and Barney has been amazing. I loved it because I got to be like, oh yeah, oh, I have a TV brain as well as this other
mm,
brain that I'm still learning, even now. So I
Mm,
have this kind of this two world mindset that I have at the moment. Um, how you educate people about this topic, I think is also ever changing. There is no right answer. I think that this documentary did a lot. So we'll hear about the impact a bit later. But people that I've spoken to who, they came up to me and said, I had no idea that cobalt was a rock. I just thought it
mm,
was a color. I was like, yeah, this is why we need to be making content like this. So, um, yeah, just from my experience, that it was I loved it so much.
mm,
And I think about the documentary quite often and come back to it quite a lot just to be like, that was huge that we did.
mm. Yeah. Okay, just to add on to that part, the aspect of the documentary which was very relatable to everyone's lives was a re was a real was a bit of an easy is an easy win as a producer to when there was all these examples which I won't go into, but of like when they were tasked with building things in the real world as part of the task, then people know what these things are, what these objects are that we talk about, the wind turbines and the ventilators and the electric cars, and then then that taps into their everyday life. They're walking down the road, they see that, and it triggers their sort of they they sort of know that this is actually like tangible. This is something that does affect them and their families and their future. So that was a real, as well as the great casting of you, Hershey and Richard, and the Natural History Museum, which is an amazing location. It was the fact that all the different components of the documentary, really tapped into everyone's life and everyone's interests, and it made it real for them very, very quickly in the documentary.
Brilliant. So, having given it that build up and described to everyone listening in, okay, how did we go about making it in this wonderful world of film, of pre-production, production, post, etc. We've just got and posted the link to the documentary into the chat. And what we're going to do now is if you click on that link, you will be taken to YouTube. We're all going to mute ourselves, but we will keep the chat going. Hershey, Richard, if you're brave enough, keep your cameras on so everyone can see us cringing. We're going to take the spotlight off Barney, Helen, Darren, and myself so you can see everyone. But we're going to watch it all together. And we're going to keep the chat going. And then when we finish, we're going to bring in a lot of the researchers who were involved in a lot of the content that went into it, but also as well who've been involved in the impact that came as a result of the release of the documentary. But firstly, a massive thanks to Barney, Darren, and Helen. It's so lovely to see you all again. And let's go and watch this thing that we created. So thank you very much. Round of applause for you guys.